Okay, we're live now, remembering uh, Ivan Arguelles, our friend and poet. I'll turn the Zoom mic over to Jack Foley. Go ahead, Jack.
Okay, thank you, Indron. Yes, of course, we're all here to honor a marvelous, really marvelous poet and an amazing poet who produced regularly a poem a day or more. And throughout his life was an extraordinarily uh, and sort of amazingly prodigious poet. He also felt that it didn't come from him. It came from elsewhere. It came from the goddess or whatever. That goddess is what he called it. It came from outside. Ivan wasn't expressing himself. He'd wake up, he'd write a poem, and the poem came from whatever it was in his head, whatever door opened, which allowed that poem to happen. There are autobiographical things in the poem and all sorts of things like that. But at the same time, I think it was an extraordinarily rich engagement with language itself, that what Ivan actually was doing was connecting deeply with possibilities of language that most of us never even notice, but which are there, and which I think of poetry often as language moving beyond itself, continually moving beyond itself into more, into different things. And I think that's true of Ivan's work as a whole. I'm sure others will have other things to say. I've written extensively about Ivan, as many of you know, and I won't say I understand his work, but I love it. And I think that it's best to love poetry before you understand it. So many people are told to read several books on Finnegan's Wake while you're reading Finnegan's Wake, which annihilates Finnegan's Wake as an aesthetic experience. No, I think what you need to do is discover the innovation and joy of Finnegan's Wake and what's wonderful about it. And then you want to know. It's like falling in love. You don't fall in love with somebody because you know all about them. You fall in love with somebody and then you want to know all about them. Why do they make me feel like this? Why do I feel like this towards them? So I think that that's the approach to Ivan. It is a wonderful experience just to read his poetry. I have a tribute to him that I'll read. I want to begin it with a few lines from Ivan himself. These were written not long after, and incidentally, he was for most of his life Ivan. The diacritical mark came later, and he became Ivan. But for most of us, and for Ivan himself, as far as I could tell, he was Ivan rather than Ivan. These particular lines are from a poem called "When I Became a Poet," and it was written shortly after he learned that he had cancer. But he still felt fine. It was a kind of paradoxical moment for him. He certainly suffered later, but at the beginning of it, he was amused that though he had cancer, he felt okay. He could go to cafe if he wanted to, that sort of thing. He felt all right. And so, but he knew what cancer meant, and that contradictory feeling was something that was in so much of the writing that he did at that point, once he learned that he had cancer. This poem is called "When I Became a Poet," and it was sent out almost exactly 2 years ago, May 24th, 2022. These are the lines. Here it is, the poem and its inability to conclude anything. Farewell, it says, to all the tender leaves and blades of grass. Goodbye to night and the millstone of the stars. Fingers gone, lost in the intimacy of hair and swooning. Poet, you are naturally dead from the start. That's from Ivan. This is for Ivan. It begins with a quote, a generous quote that Malcolm Margolin sent to me. He had a very difficult life, which he accepted. The steady, soft glow of your friendship for him was a balm, and your understanding, insightful, and frequent reviews were a gift to the community. I hope all that's true. Malcolm Margolin. And here's my poem. Isn't it just like you to die a las 5 de la tarde? Bang, bang, la vida, la pinche vida, hombre. And the deserts rolling like feudal seas towards Las Vegas and points east. You're not American. You're an Indian. I met you something like 40 years ago. I knew Marilla from Park School, and so it began. You gave me a book. I wrote you back. What you wrote was closer to what I think I'm doing than anything else I've seen. You say you write poetry. Listen, I'm doing a reading at Larry Blake's. Why don't you read with me? If your poetry is half as good as your criticism, I'm sure you'll be fine. And so it began. And so it began. I was completely unknown, had done no readings, except for one that Ivan attended at CCAC. There, Adele and I did one of the choral pieces I was writing. That the hummingbird's wings are of remarkable rapidity, he had noted often. Nothing could be done, the shift of his breathing. And hearing it, you grew excited. Then the reading at Larry Blake's. I wanted to write something special for it, something elegant and long. And as I wrote it, bit by bit, I phoned you and read you what I'd done. Is it all right? Yes, yes, it is. Keep it coming. Your beautiful voice assured me. I was amazed. No one, literally no one, had ever even liked my verse. Yet I had continued. If no one else was subject to its power, at least I was. And then there was Ivan. We were a great success at Larry Blake's. Someone had made a poster, and there we were. A young woman came up to me afterwards and singled out the long, special poem I had written, Sweeney Adrift. What a poem, she kept repeating. What a poem. Nancy Peters and Philip Lamantia were there to hear Ivan, but they heard Adele and me as well. Something original, said Nancy about my choral piece. Welcome to the house of failure, I had written in Sweeney Adrift. See, these are the structural bases of the house, its beams and arteries, its artificial light, its hands, its vast appendices. Who is not here? The range of things delights us. Welcome, welcome. See, there's the door. It opens for us. Welcome. Yes, suddenly that door of poetry opened. And it was all Ivan's doing. Everything I've ever done was in that moment, which I shared with a man who would be my lifelong friend. Dear man, do you remember our many times in Soul's Restaurant and Jewish Delicatessen in Berkeley? Are you gonna say it again? You asked. Yes, I am, I answered. And when the waitress served me my matzo ball soup, I asked her, deadpan, as I did every time a waitress served me such soup, and what do they do with the rest of the matzah? Arg, said Ivan. Will you tell me in a dream if there is matzo ball soup in poet heaven? Our times together flood over me. There was so much and so much richness in them. Do you want to hear a poem? You asked. Of course, I answered. And you read me something beautiful. This is dedicated to the one I love. On earth, to say there are couples that don't match, and flames of equidistant breath their smoke release. The sign is higher than summer, and the cipher cannot be discerned. All sights and directions weathered, and grasses of twilight lift weary shadows to a God whose nature is as unknown as death. And what's to sacrifice if not the soul's plagiarized copy afloat in clouds where sleep is buried and poetry too, descant and folio of vast unremembered lines? Your lines will be remembered, and because of you, perhaps some of mine as well, and perhaps our friendship. Goodbye, my loving, wonderful friend. I'll go to Saul's and order matzo ball soup. And I will say, as I always do, what do they do with the rest of the matzah? And I will hear your laughter and your moan. And I will know some things survive, even the dark, dark hand of death. Ivan Arguelles, January 24th, 1939 to April 28th, 2020.
Thank you.
Thank you, Indra.
Thank you. Thank you. I'd like to ask Marila Arguelles to speak, if you'd like, Marila, now. Thank you.
I have something that is not something I wrote, but it's something that I feel is very, very true. And I'm going to let my grandson access it for you. No, him is to love him, just to see him smile makes my life worthwhile. To know him is to love him, and I'd be good to him. I'd be love to him. Everyone says he'll come again when I'll walk alongside of him. Yes, to know him is to love him, and someday he will see that he was meant for me. Oh, yes. No, him is to love him, just to see him smile makes my life worthwhile. To know him is to love him, and I do, yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Marilla.
Armando and I are here with you because I didn't
Okay.
know the
And John,
parent.
and John, yes, Armando and Arturo.
Armando and Rafael.
Rafael Gonzalez.
I'd like to read a poem of Ivan's from. I know him as Ivan.
Well,
Talking-
your book is Ivan.
right. Talking to Valam Votan. And there are so beautiful poems in this book, but I wanted to read the one called The Awakening. It's the penultimate poem in the book. And if there's time later, I could read the Death of Hector. The Awakening. Ivan Arguelles. How might it be otherwise? The moon is a lantern high over the rude stone bridge, and the water below a reflection of distance and longing, whisper in the reeds and rushes, splash the now and then memory, trying to understand just once the filter through which love appears, and the contrary worlds that hover before dawn, the grasses of the eastern slope, dew wet, and the leaves transfigured by a silence which is speech itself, and the presence, yes, of a god quivering in the dark air. A hand will clasp the phantom by the waist, and in the years the sound of mountains rising from a long sleep, and clouds. How can it be any different? Light eking its way through black heavens, and reminiscence of a poem, a few words summoning the mind to its trellis, and the advent of a deity half awake in the humid collapse of time. How far does it go, this moment? How far does it go, this moment? Yeah. Ivan Arguelles. Now I'd like to invite, as I look down at my screen, Alexander Arguelles, would you like to speak? Thank you.
Thank you for asking me. I'd rather listen at this point. I'm just getting to know my father in this regard. I don't know what in our life was this way, but I didn't know him as you do in this regard, and I need to learn. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Alexander. Thank you for being here, listening. I will turn now to Sarah Cahill. Go ahead. Thank you.
This is a poem called Helen, Daughter of Nemesis. From 1988. When the ships were sent forth to the beach beyond and wandering on the hills, a veil of skin, fluttering, high hands held waving to stars, invisible, lost, her mouth established and quivers rattled in the wood, to discern then to lose all category of knowing spirit, the wildness in her created an event horizon darkening, frieze of stags and centaurs printed in her eyes, like a tape slowly moving the sleeper into great depths. Religion set on war, hail multi-breasted Artemis. If dancing and loud pipes too imaged into skull, that beauty walking in silence may be recognized, the way animals in their mortuary acquire heaven. Beneath an oak stump, an entire hive dedicated to thee, their bare feet stomping on the cold November earth. In the clepsydra reflecting the sea's raucous cancer, night saturated her eyes' own 200 planets, in shield and armor rested the ghosts do battle. A force like evergreen shoots up the spine's hotel. Her mind docks on lunar spit, her lips expressionless, cannot bear the constant sidereal information flood, which is a consequence of Greece historiography. What should they do first when smitten by this fever? A fade, songs, then glyphs of sand being erased, a clue, climb the tresses she dangles from the Trojan rampart, cycles the blind in havoc that deposit flowers, locally anesthetized so the sound feels her style to obtain the broad way to heighten the flush, to endure forever the ecstasy, supping on the drug, featured her tattoos in recent Anatolian museums, flexing the orbital thought in order to envision her, communicating the bane of Nemesis to its mirror. The diffractioned memory frets Athena's handiwork, echo reaching its preterite ear in sigmatic opium. I wear her like I wear terrestrial catastrophe. Junctions in the bower where confessional ivy burns, and to lift either hem above the starline, drunk, not touching unless with the heart's enigmatic fist, to fuse the daughter to her preordained gilded sepulchre, ancient the mnemonic palms arch their shadows, to protect nothing, eliminating the hand's gnosis, revealing her in the embattled sky of Momus, a wraith, long day traversing blonde to red, the shock of chrysanthemums, can still be in love after hours of radiation treatment. Of all photogrammatical possibilities, she remains the most.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sarah. I'd like to invite Anne Felton to the mic. Thank you. If you could just unmute.
I did. I
Great,
had to
great.
figure it out.
Thank you.
I am not a poet. I met Ivan and Marilla many years ago, and Ivan and Marilla were very, very kind to me. And I was holding up this book to show that here's a picture of Max and Marilla, and then on the back, of course, is a picture of Ivan. I guess you can't see it very well because of the reflection of my shades here, but this is coil. And I wanted to just read his inscription to me when he gave me this book. It says, "For Anne, it writes the promise of still another day. Love, Ivan." I even met Alexander a while back, so hi, Alexander. It's been a long time, but I just wanted to be here so I could show my respect for a very, very great man. And his lasting legacy, his lasting gift to me is introducing me to Jack Foley. And so Jack and I have been good friends for as long. I remember Jack said Ivan told him that he should meet me, that I would become part of the family. And that was a great, great compliment to me from a very great and generous, one of the most compassionate people I've ever known. So while I didn't know him as well as a poet, I knew him as a person. And he was obviously a man of great love. So I'm only here to pay my respects and to listen to the rest of you wonderful poets speak. So from that end, I will pass to the next player here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anne. Thank you. And I think tonight we're discovering and we're learning about Ivan and Ivan and as poet, as human being. So it's a wonderful opportunity for us. Let me ask if you would like Dale Jensen and Judy Wells to come to the mic. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm not going to read anything, but Ivan was not somebody I saw every day by any means, but he was very much part of my life. Back in the days when every poet goes through a period where they're writing the absolute garbage out of their systems. And when I was doing that, I became aware of Ivan for years, Ivan now, through his books. And his writing just blew me away. And then I realized that he was in the Bay Area. And I kept reading him, I kept writing. And I went to a reading at Larry Blake's where he was reading with this guy, some guy named Jack Foley. And I met Jack there, and life continued. And I watched Ivan evolve from basically mostly page poems to the long, elaborate works where world culture just went through him, and just watching him read, and reading what he'd written, just the fire. And my background academically is in psychology, and just watching all the parts of the mind and all the parts of the universe that collect in the mind come out. I think we all wound up with a lot of Ivan in us just from watching Ivan and hearing Ivan. And I think that we all owe Ivan a great thanks for that. I'm still processing the fact that Ivan isn't here on the same level, the physical level that we are right now anymore. But still thank him for being, and thank him for creating what he created, and what it expressed of him, and what of him and of what he expressed became part of us. And thank you, thank you, thank you, Ivan. That's it.
Thank you so much, Dale, Jensen,
Judy?
Judy.
I am also a poet, but unlike Ivan and Jack and Dale, I am not an avant-garde poet. So I found Ivan's poetry very challenging, especially the books that Dale bought and brought home and read. And I was a little overwhelmed by this huge world consciousness and all the references and everything. His mind came from his mind. But I loved going to readings and hearing him read his own poetry, because he read with such incredible passion everything that Dale was talking about. You could hear the passion in his voice as he read it, and it was wonderful. And there's one poem that sticks out in my mind. He had this line over and over in Italian. I can't exactly, ragazzi, or it was about ragazzi, ragazzi, ragazzi. I'm not sure. Jack, do you remember that one? It was
Ragazza, it means girl in Italian.
ragazzi.
Ragazza. Yeah, and it was all
Ragazza.
yeah,
Ragazza.
yeah, great
Yeah.
poem. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that poem, and he usually read it at his readings. And I'm sorry he's gone. I'm sorry he went through that final suffering from cancer. And I'm sorry for all the people who really were very close to him, including Jack, family, and people who are just inspired by his poetry. So thank you, Ivan. Rest in peace, and I hope heaven has a few surprises you can write about.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Judy, Dale. Before we go on, would somebody like to speak about Ivan's vast knowledge of languages? I mean, I know he would correct me on my Portuguese. Of course, he spoke Spanish and English. I think he spoke French too. and but then he also spoke these, or knew to reading, had reading knowledge of these Indian languages, and I always wanted to ask him about that. I never got a chance to go into detail. If anybody would like to just speak a little bit about his vast linguistic gifts.
This I can answer.
Thank you. Thank you.
This I can answer, okay? I think most of you might know this. I don't know where this Ivan Arguelles came from. He was never that. My father, Ivan Arguelles, Ivan Wallace Arguelles, was born with that name because he had a German heritage and Spanish heritage, and he grew up to certain degrees knowing both of those languages. When he was 14 years old, he started studying Latin in high school, and that just took to him like wildfire. He just loved it and saw connections between Latin and the Spanish that he got from not just his father, but his mother was a professional interpreter of Spanish and Portuguese. So he grew up with a lot of languages and then started studying this, and decided at that point that he would also teach himself by just going to use bookstores or libraries and getting grammars of Romanian and Catalan and French, the other Romance languages. In college, he studied classics, Greek, and continued with Latin, also started Sanskrit at that point. After that, he kind of aspired for a while to learn Chinese or Russian or Arabic, very difficult world languages, and realized that that would just take too much time away from poetry and other things. And so started graduate school in classics, but decided to go into library science instead, and made the Romance language family his bread and butter. I mean, he cataloged, he kept abreast of everything that was published in all of these languages, and so had a vast knowledge of the entire, not just the languages themselves, but the literature that was written in them. He also kept up with Greek, which he always said that he knew was not a Romance language, but he just felt somehow he conflated it with one. It seemed like it was because it was so similar in its history. In that Romance family, because he actually worked in Italy for a while. He went there with the goal of improving his Italian. He always had a particular love for Italian, but he knew the entire branch, everything that came from Latin, everything, you know, from the major languages like Spanish and Portuguese to the teeny tiny dialects like Sicilian and Retro-Romansh. He just kept his finger on the pulse of every Romance language. As I said, he started learning more exotic languages early on, but kind of felt that that was just taking him too much time. But he did keep up with Sanskrit and Hindi. And I remember when we traveled to India when I was a child, he was able to, I don't know, somehow order in restaurants and get around with that. But he just always had a particular love for that. So he took early retirement from the University Library when he was 61 years old, specifically so he could become an Indologist. And so he just taught himself a wide range of Indian languages. And in his library, which I've now inherited, has all these Bengali novels and Marathi texts and Sinhalese type books as well. So if you really want to know, I can tell you exactly. I can tell you. He knew the entire Romance branch of the Indo-European language family. That's Latin, Spanish, Italian, French, Provençal, Catalan, Portuguese, Romanian, Sardinian. He knew medieval languages like Occitan, Old French, and he knew dialectical variants of little languages like Retro-Romansh and Ladino, Corsican, and Sicilian. He knew Greek diachronically. He knew Homeric Greek, Attic Greek, Koine Greek, or New Testament Greek, Byzantine Greek, Modern Greek. He always loved Kazantzakis. The Indic language branch is too vast to know everything like he did with the European ones, but he knew like the major languages: Sanskrit first and foremost, Pali, Awadhi, Raj Bahasa to read the Ramayana, various versions of that, Hindi, Urdu, Bengali, Marathi, Sinhala, Nepali, and he said somehow he didn't like the German that he got from his grandparents, so he tried to forget it. But he knew how to read Germanic languages as well as reference languages. So you want to know? That's what he knew.
Alexander, he said to me once, partly in joking, but not entirely, every time I get depressed, I learn a language.
Mm.
Well, I think you know, and everybody knew that, in the hospital and the respite home, everybody was just amazed that he had a stack of books with him all the time. He had Homer, Virgil, Dante, and all these others with him all the time.
Virgil and Dante above others.
Yeah, and people just looked at that and said, how can you do that? It did not cost him energy to, he had a Pali grammar with him on his deathbed. It didn't cost him energy. It gave him energy to study and read.
Amazing. Thank you. Thank you, Alexander. Let me ask Slade Schuster to speak. Slade?
Hello, Indran. Thank you. Thank you. I don't know how to work a Zoom. Am I on at all?
Yes, you are. You are. We hear you clearly.
People hear me?
Yep.
Can they see me?
Yes. Yes.
Oh. Well, thank you very much. And Ivan and his brother Joe go all the way back with me. We were classmates together in Rochester, Minnesota, in Edison grade school back in the 1940s, if you can go back that far. I think there's one or two of you I see that might be able to. And we were at Edison grade school, and we went on through Rochester Junior High School together and Rochester Senior High School, and graduated all together in 1956 from Rochester Senior High School. It wasn't Ivan and Jose then. They were Ivan and Joe, okay, in Minnesota. And we didn't keep track of each other after we graduated. I did a stint in the Army and then taught high school English for 40 years in Minnesota. And Ivan became a world famous poet. And when I retired and began to dabble in poetry, as what's a high school English teacher going to do when he retires? He's going to dabble in poetry. And so I wormed my way back into Ivan's email, and Ivan was very kind to me. But I made the mistake one day of quoting Robert Frost to him about what Robert Frost said about free verse, which Robert Frost did not like much. And as you recall, Robert Frost said free verse was like playing tennis with the net down. And Ivan thought that was comical and very provincial of me. And he was absolutely right, of course. But before I read this poem, which I wrote, I have forewarned you all that you're dealing here with an anachronistic old putz of a poet who still labors to write rhymed, metered verse. And I apologize at the outset, but the poem I'm going to read is a poem I wrote about Edison grade school in Rochester, Minnesota. And it's called My Day at School. And I didn't write it with Ivan in mind, but it's about our fourth grade teacher, Miss Whitman, in Edison grade school. And I didn't have Ivan in mind, but Ivan was there all along. And so this could almost be taken as Ivan's day in school too. So here's how it goes. My day at school. As I walked to school one day, a world war began. Snowflakes were whistling in the air, geese flying in a V. And before I reached the park, they hung a black man in a tree. Mom had packed my lunchbox, and I checked it as I went. Cheese sandwich, grapes, a cookie. Then they shot the president. Mallard ducks were huddled in the park beside an icy stream. And they killed a man in Memphis just because he had a dream. At school, Miss Whitman led the pledge. We had show and tell, read stories, had a fire drill, ate our sandwiches at noon, played kickball during recess, and a man walked on the moon. We practiced for our sing-song in the Christmas pageant show and made paper snowman cutouts with holly leaves and mistletoe. We studied long division, improper fractions too. Lost another Asian war, and Miss Whitman had us do some simple sentence grammar, subject, verb, and common noun. Then some airplanes full of people came and knocked the towers down. After school, We played marbles and built leaf forts in the yard. Snow fell faster toward the evening. The mallards flew away, and the black man won the White House. That was pretty much our day. Rest in peace, Ivan.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lee. I think reports of the death of Meachard Verse were too premature. Meachard and Ryan Verse will live, as will Free Verse, and there will
Well,
be no.
Can I add one thing?
Sure, of course.
When I asked Ivan when I went to print a collection of my verse, if he would write a cover blurb for it, and although it was that kind of poetry, he was very kind to me and wrote a very nice cover blurb, which I'd be glad to read. But I've read my one poem, so it's up to you.
No, please go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, it's on a. Are you seeing this? I can't see myself. It's a collection of verse called "Thou Art That," and I should read the title poem, which is very short. It's just 12 lines. It's called "Thou Art That." The tulips, the bee that her colors blaze out for. The bee is the honey, he flies to the hive. The honey's the sweetness that seeps in its matrix. The sweetness is sunlight that keeps all alive. Sunlight is life, of which poets sing as they empty themselves of themselves to be filled with the tulip, the honey, the thing, and try to make sense of their lives. Tulip, qua tulip, is empty of being, empty of meaning and emptiness too. But tulip and bee is an anima mundi, and honey, and sweetness, and sunlight, and you. Ivan, thou wert that. Rest in peace. And have I taken too much time?
No, don't worry. Go ahead. And
here's what Ivan wrote. I don't know if you can see that. Anyway, he wrote, "Don't be caught off balance by the apparent rhyming simplicity of these verses. In a day of postmodernist verbal hijinks masquerading as the poetic art, it's refreshing to know there are a few scribblers and bards out there who can still rhyme meaningfully." The author chides and belittles himself for these often whimsical, but more often profound and metaphysical rhymes. More than once, I have been caught off balance by these less than unassuming lines. The title poem of this second collection is a case in point, filled with pithy observations such as "Sunlight is life, of which poets sing as they empty themselves of themselves. Not a bag of wind such as Aeolus gave to Ulysses, but a flower-strewn basket of blossoming rhymes endued by the muses." I might parenthetically add that Slade is no stranger to me, but a living figure from a past that goes back to shared grade and high school experiences. It has been a joy to reconnect with him. Ivan Arguelles, I will treasure that.
thank you. And we will too. Thank you, Slade. I'd like to ask now Mary Marcia Casoli, if you'd like to say something. Thank you.
Well, I wasn't going to read anything, and then I found something.
Go
And
ahead.
I had to be here because I am so grateful for him and Jack, because he published I didn't publish my first book, Run to Tenderness, little known. And I knew him slightly before that, before 2002, actually, because my friend Bob Durbin, who was a librarian, lived in the same building and knew him. And we shared a big, and I would run into him now and again in those Berkeley days. And this poem, all those emails that he sent, the poems, time after time, so prolific, it overwhelmed me. And but I did love them, even though much I didn't understand them. I just bits and pieces, lines, or something that would that I loved, like to quote Jack, that I loved it first without actually understanding it. Anyway, I sent him this poem, and it's called Tapestry Poem, beginning with a line by Ivan Arguelles. A leaf is spectacular for what it cannot say, weaves, twisted over and over again, grows thick stems that rival illuminated calligraphy. A great acanthus forest with fronds wider than implausible elephant harangues, looped tight to convincing maidenhair panegyric. The foreground vines of silky twilight. The background lurks William Morris cruel black. Pliny the owl floats over the uppermost perch, where a scarlet-shouldered whiter, a joyful, bridled titmouse, curious as ever, joins the party, disbelieving any chance of bird toy traps. Below, a pair of cutthroat pheasants scratch their crowns, rise and sink, their feathered necks flecked as if by blood, and they cackle at that same old joke. But dead center, there he is, Ivan, quiet, and the sack drab brown, where Lucinia Nightingale attempts to combat the tedium of insomnia. But Ivan's song alone is heard. It is the grief of a great unbreaking music that you'd swear was only meant for you. He sings beyond needles, beyond blade. For this, he nearly dies laughing. For another day, for want of another day. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I will always be grateful for Ivan and Jack.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much. Sir.
Lovely. It is the grief of a great unbreakable music. Yeah. Thank you. Now I'd like to invite Lucille Langdea to the microphone. Thank you.
Here, I think I'm unmuted now. I was always awed by Ivan's poetry with its just vast knowledge and flow of images, truly incredible. One of the times I heard him read, he was reading with Jack Foley from their book, Dead Requiem, in which they both have poems. And I've been writing poetry for about 50 years, and I was so moved and inspired by that reading and Ivan's poetry that I wrote a poem during the reading. And in my 50 years of writing poetry, that's the only time I have ever written a poem during a reading. It's a short poem, so I thought I would read it. It's called Epitaph. Look for me in the sunset, all pink and gold, and in the fruiting body of a slime mold swaying on its stalk. Whisper my name to the millipede molting its exoskeleton, and to the pink-footed gull scavenging on the dock. Tell the horseshoe crab and brittle star I say hello when the tide goes out. I am lingering between the lines of my poems and between the reeds with the sora. Listen for its whistle, per wee. Remember me to the coot with its heavy flight and stubby tail. Remember me to the bright red mite with long hair on its legs, and to all the ciliates like bells and tiny feet conjugating in the sea.
Bravo.
So thank you, Ivan, and Jack too, for that poem.
Very welcome, wonderful poem too. And what you did was to take the two of us. You took the two of us and brought us straight into your consciousness, into that poetry, science consciousness that you do so well. Thank you.
Thank you. May I now ask Sheila Murphy to speak? Thank you.
I'll just say a few words. I had the privilege of inviting Ivan to read for us at the Scottsdale Center for the Arts Poetry Series that Beverly Carver and I ran for about 12 years. And we were happy that he accepted our invitation. He came, he and I dined together, and I think it's evidence of how impactful a short meeting and a short period of time being together can be in our lives. I often reflect on the difference between going to a conference and seeing the same person for, say, 12 times over a period of years, or seeing somebody every day for an equivalent amount of time. In this case, it was very beautifully impactful to meet him, to talk with him. We had a beautiful evening together. His reading was met with great admiration and love by the people who came to hear him. And interestingly, we seem to have quite a bit in common. My mother was a Latin teacher, so you can imagine that was a rather nice vault into conversation about Romance languages and such. One of my best friends is a librarian, a noteworthy one as he was, and of course our mutual love of poetry. So while I don't have as much immediate closeness with Ivan as most of you here have, partly because of proximity. I've been in Phoenix, Arizona all of my adult life, but it was a very meaningful time to be with him. It was lovely to have him come here to grace us with his presence, his vitality, his vast knowledge. So we really had a great treat, and he has stayed with me. We've corresponded some, and I'm very, very grateful for Ivan, and I wish everybody here my condolences, of course, because I know that his loss is a profound one for all of us, but perhaps especially for those of you who are immediately close. Jack and I are dear friends from a long time ago, and we've kept in touch a good deal, but not nearly enough just recently. So there's all that beautiful bond, and I thank you for putting on this wonderful occasion too.
Thank you so much, Sheila. Wonderful to hear about Jack and Ivan on the road in Arizona, and how he left an indelible mark in the memories of those who heard him many years ago. May I ask Carl Landau to the mic? Thank you.
Yes, hi, it's Carl, and I just want to say a couple of words. And I first met Ivan through readings with Jack. So I'd go, and I was just amazed by Ivan's poetry, by his encyclopedic knowledge, or let me language a little and say hyper encyclopedic knowledge, his imagination, his passion, his craft. And I was privileged to get those emails, those daily emails of his poems. And he didn't write lunch poems. He didn't write breakfast poems. He wrote pre-dawn poems. And so you'd see these emails come in that said 5:30, 5:46, 6 o'clock. And there were these poems, and amazing. And I am a lover of Dante. And every time there was a Dante poem, I'd be particularly pleased. And I've just, in recent months, wanted to ask him, Ivan, can you write a Dante cycle, a Commedia cycle for us? And I never got to ask him that. Anyway, thanks for everyone.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Carl. I would like to ask Andrew Geron to speak. Thank you.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. I'm so happy to be here joining you all in honoring Ivan's memory. He was, as many of you had noted, he's such a prodigious poet, the daily poem and all that, really a force of nature. So it's hard to believe he's gone. It's like looking out your window and seeing a mountain has disappeared. And hearing Alexander list all of the languages that he knew just confirmed that in my mind. Alexander, I happen to know that you equal your father in being an incredible linguist and polyglot. So you do take after your father in that way. But having you spell out all of the languages that he knew was just, yeah, it was a confirming moment for me about Ivan's prodigiousness. Indran, you have published the last book of Ivan's to be published in his lifetime. I brought with me here today Ivan's second book, published in 1978. His first two books were published in the same year, 1978. The first one being Instamatic Reconditioning, and this one, The Invention of Spain. And there's a picture of the young Ivan on the back. So I'm just going to read one poem from his second book, Exiles. What the Dead see is sleep's extra mile, one we have to reinvent daily in the pursuit of oblivion. What we see is the opposite course, a million needles trembling, magnetized in the statue's fixed smile. We make collections of abrased rock, of absent sky, of water impossible to divine. We wage war with the dead who keep singing needlessly. We are confused and alone in this matter, not knowing where to turn. The second day has less meaning yet. Windows light up like milk jugs on a step we cannot approach. Nothing else is defined for us. Our feet exist at an algebraic distance from our shoes, and our hearts echo with the horizontal music of an infinitely repeated childhood. So already with the second book, he was that amazing prodigious poet that we have known him to be all these years. I'm not sure how many of you know that Ivan was also a writer of prose fiction. At least I have one example of a prose fiction that he wrote, Orientalia, published in the early 2000s by Lunar Bysant, and he called it a novella. So I'll just read one paragraph of Ivan's prose fiction. And some of this is actually a meditation on prose fiction. So Ivan writes, evidence of prose and fractured passages about the telephone, a history of disembodied voices. Night is sooner best, day a neon interval of biting remorse. When words function in isolation as units of warning, red at the top, followed by a descending, dizzy, indigo sequence, until in a shallow pool face up, you, elevating the entire lake above the horizon, invisible cities begin to emerge, shining and crystalline, like shaking off a personality, looking for a clue in the shed skin, discarded in the slough behind the reed bed, covers the distance of refined ether, planets coming and going like women in a gallery, reflections of each other, diminished by afternoon's dim light. At the cocktail hour, in burnished glass and topaz, we used to meet, convictions about eternity in a hemisphere of ice, or a theory of art in the eyeliner you employed, looking away toward a fragrant traffic. Opium, the perfume, suggestions of a paradise in decay. Who will conform to the shape of angels in ink? The certainty that islands are immutable, that the sea around them is only an instantaneous flash, that everything exists for just a fraction of a second between the ears. After, then, is what cannot be known. Will nothing be, from nothing born. Ivan Arguelles.
Thank you so much, Andrew. Beautiful. I wanted to read one poem I wrote after I heard the news, the shocking news of, well, it was, you never quite know how to react and how and when this news will come. And so when I heard the news, and I'd of course passed through this experience with my mother passing earlier in the year, so it was on my mind. Anyway, I wrote this poem, brief poem called "Talking to Ivan," which is in the more or less in the form of a sonnet, but at least the 14 lines. It goes like this. Birds are in full throat this morning, Ivan, and deer amble along my path of ablution through the woods. A fishing eagle rises from rocks in the river. This is my salutation to you, brother, on your way to the other side. Early dawn mist starts to leave the field. The sun comes out. I will read you when back at my desk. You are not dead, Ivan. Birds sing your words. There is no coil, just transit to another plane. Movement, the only rule. We are moving, Ivan. You to dreams, paradise, I to the woods, around the park. April 29th, 2024. Thank you. And I would like to turn now to Christopher Bernard. And I think Christopher will be the last speaker unless I have, let me know if I have not, anyone else would like to say something. After Christopher, we can perhaps all engage in a few minutes of conversation and then close the ceremony.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Indra, and thank you very much for hosting this. This has been a moving and beautiful event. I'm very proud and happy to be part of it. I've known Ivan through Jack, basically, and we had a strong, I think, a mutual respect. I had enormous admiration for his work and continued to. Jack kindly let me know about Ivan's passing, I think the day it happened, by email. And I wrote this poem the following day. It is called The Sea. In memoriam, Ivan Arguelles. In the beginning, he was in flight already, an Amazon of words cascading from the hills, water for the thirsting across the jungle plains toward a shoreless Atlantic, almost overwhelming for us who did not always know our need for him. A time that scorns the spirit, scorns the fruit of the spirit, as though it feared at long last to live. Those who thirst too long drown in sand. His gifts lie here, many-colored, like Joseph's robe when his brothers brought it to their father. The poem that he wrought without end or beginning lies here in its shimmering for those who need shelter in the desert's night. When I heard of his death, I said, Ivan's seemingly endless river of language has now entered the sea. Another friend replied to me, he has not entered the sea. He is the sea.
That is such a moving line to finish the formal part of our program. He is the sea. Please, I'll open the mic to anyone who would like to add some more words. I'll keep the recording going until such time as we feel.
Indran, thank you again for hosting this. We have two other friends of my grandfather's here, Rafael and Armando, who have short pieces they'd like to share.
Oh, wonderful. Yes, I didn't see Armando, and I'm so glad that you mentioned that. Thank you. Go ahead, Rafael and Armando. Gracias.
Thank you. As many of you know, or some of you may know, I write my poems in 2 languages, so it's 1 poem in 2 languages. Leyendo unos poemas a Ivan Arguelles. Leyendo unos poemas es ahogarse en palabras, nadar en miel tan densa que con cada esfuerzo nos hundimos en ellas, más en la dulzura espesa. Oímos el zumbar de abejas, saqueando las flores para hacer aún más miel. Entre las congojas hay destellos que nos antojan chispas, referencias a una multitud de cosas almacenadas en la prodigiosa torre de Babel, bibliotecario ciego. Al fin salimos a la luz ebrios, inciertos si es iluminación o alucinación después de un viaje psicodélico. Reading some poems to Ivan Arguelles, mi amigo Juanito. Reading some poems is to drown in words, to swim in honey so dense that with every stroke we sink deeper in the sweet thickness. We hear the buzz of bees pillaging the flowers to make even more honey. Among the griefs are flashes that we fancy sparks, references to a multitude of things stored in the prodigious Tower of Babel by a blind librarian. At the end, we come out to the light, uncertain if it was enlightenment or hallucination after a psychedelic trip. And that was my impression and my love of the poetry of my dear, dear friend, Juanito, Ivan. I never knew, finishing one of his poems, if he was really enlightened or whether it was hallucination. It was so thick that I drowned in the words and in the references, my dear friend. Thank you.
Beautiful.
Thank you. Hermoso y profundo y todo. Y esto fue Armando, ¿no? Gracias, Armando. Es que no.
Buenos días. Hello, everybody.
Yes.
My name is Armando Rendon. And one observation, it occurred to me in listening to everybody that Ivan was also going through an evolution, because myself as a Chicano writer, publisher, and really, really much involved in Chicano literature, promoting Chicano literature and Chicano writers.
I ran across Ivan Arguelles only a couple of years ago. Happened to see a website, an online review of his work. And in the bio at the bottom, it said Mexican-American poet. And so, who the hell is this guy? Because I'd never heard of him, either as a poet or as a Mexican-American poet. So I was intrigued, and I looked him up. Turns out that he was about maybe 10 minutes, 15 minutes from where I lived in here in the Berkeley area. So that was amazing. So I contacted him, and we got together and began a friendship that I now characterize it as having met someone for a short time, but completely connecting with him. And I think maybe that was part of his power, his energy that you picked up, and that everyone spoke about. The ability to reach out and just make a connection immediately, or not. I'm sure that happened also. It happened to me that I now characterize him as my newest old friend, because I feel about him as if I had known him all my life. And I think it was Mr. Schuster, who's known him at least 40 years or more, 50 years, right? Going back to the 40s. But I feel like I had known him that much time also. Now here's the thing that I also learned about him, and that is that he is also not just a Mexican-American poet, but I think he also was a Chicano. And I think he felt that more toward his last years than he had ever had before. So when we met, I think that was something that that evolution became much more obvious in our discussions anyway. Perhaps he didn't reflect it so much in his poetry, but with me, we did speak about his Mexican-Americanness, let's say. So I really want to make him known more as a Mexican-American poet, just because I loved him so much, and I think he deserves that kind of respect from the Mexican-American community as a fabulous poet that he was. And he gave me various, I guess the last maybe 9 or 10 books that he published. Amazing how much he published. It's just extraordinary. And the inscriptions on them always, he signed them as Juanito. And as Rafael mentioned, he liked for us to call him Juanito. He called himself Juanito to us. So it gives you an idea of the spectrum of this man. Well, I do have a poem to read. It's not my own poem, but again, it reflects the impact that he had on people that he permitted to come into his purview, his vision, his consciousness. It's by a colleague of mine who had been writing poetry for some years, apparently, but under a pseudonym. And apparently, when Yvonne died, she had only met him a few months ago, and she told me that she, like, spontaneously, she sat down and wrote a poem about the experience that we had together with him, having lunch here in Berkeley at a Mexican restaurant. And she, she reflects, I think, many of the thoughts that we've discussed here, especially his ability to relate to people. It was that he just had an expansive ability to absorb you, if you let him. But it was a very welcome type of openness that he had. Well, my friend Luz Schweig had been using a pen name, and for the first time, she told me, because when she sent this poem to me, I said, "Lovely poem. Do you want to read it at this memorial?" And she thought about it for a while. She finally got back to me and said, "Yes, I'd like you to read it." And then further on, she said, "I'd like you to use my name." So the way she was like coming out of this, this other persona she had, and allowing herself to be known as Luz Schweig poet. And I thought that was just wonderful. That having met Ivan gave her that kind of freedom. I think, so let me read the poem, and I think you'll see what I'm trying to describe in my poor words. But does this work? I agree. Okay. The poem is called Recuerdos. It's a take on one of his poems called Olvidos, Forgotten Things. This is Recuerdos, Remembered Things. I found you sitting on the Sixth bank, diagonally across from me at the table, that galaxia between us growing, with the voices and spouses and friends, swallowing my own voice like black holes faster than my multiplying questions and flashes of my husband's explanation of Sanskrit compounds called samasas, how ancient words merge to contain dusk and dawn at once, both heaven and earth, Chilot and Sipakli, as if prefixes held secrets to time-space continuums folded into some sonic utterances, and how a forgotten ethos gets lost in translation. Like the words of introverts in group settings, or the valley of Tenochtitlan under smog, where I heard you also grow up. That place where Popo and Ista oversee the multitudes and the poets, those who we immemorialize, flickers in time, like sepia codices held onto our dead ancestors, like your 55 books hold onto your psyche, or my lungs hold breath when waiting for tiny openings in conversations, 1,000 thoughts suspended, disappearing faster than salsas rojas y verdes. Days before beachgoers in Mazatlan partied under a Tonatiuh devouring eclipse. That October afternoon at Sabor Cancun. Over, faster than comets, memory, cancer.
Thank you. Thank you, Armando.
I have one actually just brief thing. I think I'm one of the few people who knew Ivan, and I had a lunch with both Ivan and Joe, and it was an extraordinary experience. By the time Ivan and Joe invited me to lunch, we had it at the Bateau Eve, which was the sort of literary restaurant in Berkeley. We used to call it, Ivan and I used to call it the Battered Ivan. And what was amazing was that though they were identical twins, they no longer looked alike, or at least not exactly alike. So you could tell the difference between them very, very easily. And they were very playful with one another. They were sort of showing off too, and fooling with each other and fooling with me as well. It was a very charming lunch that we had. But what was the most amazing thing to me, I'd always thought of Ivan's voice as being completely distinctive. And there it was in Jose's mouth, too. And to hear the two of them in that voice talking back and forth was just the most extraordinary experience. I gather that when they were young and a girlfriend would call and Ivan answered, and if the girlfriend said, "Hi, is this Jose?" Ivan would say yes, and vice versa. This is something they were able to do because the voice was so clearly the same voice.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jack.
Thank you, Indra. It's been a wonderful experience for me seeing all of these people, some of whom I've known for years, some of whom I don't know at all. And it brings back so much of Ivan for me, and there's so much more there.
Thank you. I know it's a bit late, but Marilla, the screen there is blank, so the camera must not be on. I don't know if you are able to, or someone there can put on the camera just at this moment, if that's possible. Otherwise, not to worry. But we heard everything spoken from that screen, and thank you. And thank you, Dale and Judy, Slade, Mary, Marcia, Lucille, Alexander, Sarah, Carl, Armando, Marilla, and if I haven't mentioned someone, please say your name.
Thank you so much thank you for putting this together. It's very meaningful. It's wonderful to see everyone.
Thank you. I will close the recording now, and remember, I'm just so grateful that we had the chance to work with Ivan on this book. Talking to Valim Bhutan, and the last conversation I had with him was when he received the books, and he was so happy with the way the books came out, and he was just, it was just I'm so grateful that he got to see the book, obviously, and was able to distribute it to some of his family and friends. And of course, the book lives, the words live, the poems live. And thank you all. And I will share the recording once I download it, and I'll send it around. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Cheers. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Much love. Much love.